Hey everyone, welcome to the March 15th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this week we're looking back at last weekend's racing from around the country, focusing primarily on Tampa Bay Downs, where the lone Derby prep from last week took place. That was the Grade 2 Tampa Bay Derby. We'll talk about that prep and horses that you might want or not want out of there, as well as other graded stakes that took place on that undercard. Some nice older horses in action on both the dirt and the turf, particularly in the Challenger and the Hillsborough. We'll talk about those stakes races, as well as Oaklawn Park a little bit later in the show. We'll mention the Grade 2 Azeri, where champion CC came back to action victorious on Saturday, as well as a couple of other pretty impressive 3-year-olds that we saw last weekend at Oaklawn that could make a splash in stakes company in their next starts. And then we'll finish things up by talking about some stakes races from Santa Anita, Gulfstream, Turfway, and even one from Parks at the beginning of last week as we finish up the Pacecast in about an hour or so. But Craig, let's start with Tampa Bay Downs, and that's where the Derby prep took place, the Tampa Bay Derby. A lot of speculation about Classic Causeway and whether he can make an impact in the Kentucky Derby or not based on this effort. Certainly not among the fastest prep races that we've seen.
No, it wasn't. He only wound up with a 110 TimeformUS speed figure for me. I had originally tweeted out a 114. There was some confusion with some of the timing on the races, particularly one of the other route races, which we'll talk about later. To Tampa Bay's credit, they did switch to beam timing for all of their races as of this day. They had been kind of a mix, some beam and some not. There were a couple small issues, but we got them all ironed out behind the scenes, and I'm confident that figure is a pretty good representation of his ability. And though he looked really good, visually, numerically, and just with his style, I'm not sold that anyone from this race is much of a Derby threat personally.
Yeah, that 110 TimeformUS speed figure the Classic Causeway earned for this victory was a 3-point regression on his Sam F. Davis number. And, Craig, we talked about it on the podcast last week. We both were kind of the view that some of the new challengers in this Tampa Bay Derby didn't exactly make it that much tougher a race than the Sam F. Davis. I think I certainly thought that the biggest rivals to Classic Causeway in this race were the horses coming out of the Davis, and they actually finished 3rd, 4th, and 5th here. Shipstational, Golden Glider, and Trademark horses that all finished behind Classic Causeway last time. Just one new face, Grantham, snuck in there for 2nd, but it just played like a very similar race to the Davis, where Classic Causeway broke sharply, got to the front end. That tendency he has to break out of the gate very alertly should serve him well in a race like the Kentucky Derby, where you do want to ace the start in a 20-horse field. But this was the kind of race where he was supposed to step forward. I mean, you would have wanted to see him beat this field by 5 or 6 lengths, just kind of given what was behind him. And he didn't do that. Some might say he had something left in the tank. It's not like he was all out through the stretch of this race, but you do want to start to see these 3-year-olds take a step forward. And Classic Causeway is just the kind of horse that has never really moved forward off that big number that he ran in his debut at Saratoga last year. So we'll see. Brian Lynch was saying they might give him one more prep race in the Bluegrass, but you'd like to see him in that final prep take a step forward.
Yeah, for sure. Initially, there was talk that they might just train up to the Derby, my favorite horse racing phrase, and I say that very facetiously. But that would have been a mistake, I think. No way this horse is ready for the Derby off of 8-week layoff, I wouldn't think. But yeah, I agree. I'm not going to put much stock in that he could have run faster because, I mean, at most, what's that going to be? A couple points. And yeah, I just don't see it. And the real danger for me, and it's a little early to speculate on the field, but with a lot of the horses we see pointing to the Derby and a horse who likes to go wire to wire, he's going to have some trouble. Some of the others in here, I mean, I thought Shipsational ran pretty well again. Probably he's a really good New York bred, obviously. Not the greatest of trips, but he's still kind of lacking in the speed to figure department. And Grantham is that horse who is really making the race he came out of, which I believe was the Withers, look a lot stronger than it first appeared on paper. That was the race that was won by early voting, who just went out and set a crazy fast pace and was able to run the rivals off their feet. But we've seen a couple good runbacks from that race already, so maybe that's a race to watch. Not saying that that's a real Derby prep either, but certainly looks better than it looked at the time.
Well, we've got a couple horses from the Withers that are arguably in the Kentucky Derby now, and among them, not yet, is the winner early voting, who only has 10 points for winning that race, but Unoho obviously enough points to get in the Derby with his Rebel victory, and Grantham probably on the bubble after finishing second in this Tampa Bay Derby. I think he got 20 points for this race, and maybe just 1 point for that fourth in the Withers, but you'd imagine he's another horse that'll show up in a prep about 4 weeks from now, so we'll see what we get from him, but that Withers might not be as laughably bad a race as some people were saying at the time. We'll see early voting in action in the Wood Memorial for his final prep. But yeah, Craig, I pretty much agree with you. As for that New York bred Shipsational, I thought that he ran pretty well. He covered a lot more ground than Classic Causeway. I think that was just a function of his outside post position. I really didn't think Manny Franco had too many other options other than going 3 to 4 wide around both turns. And he had to be asked pretty hard around the far turn to stay in contact, but I thought that he kept on well in the late stages. I do ultimately think he's a horse that'll benefit from less distance. I'm not really viewing Shipsational as a horse that's crying out for a mile and a quarter, but he did run admirably in this race. I thought two horses that you just might want to mention that maybe were mildly compromised are Golden Glider, who did finish fourth, just missed second, really the only horse that I saw that did any significant running from the back of the pack. He was closing pretty well in the late stages to just miss second. And also Trademark, that big long shot that I highlighted on the forecast last week, just got kind of an uncomfortable trip. I don't think he's fast enough to run with Classic Causeway early, but he kind of got into the same position that he did in the Sam Davis, where he was uncomfortable between horses, pulling a little bit on his jockey, had to search for room at the top of the stretch, alter course multiple times. Again, I don't know that he was going to be second with a clean trip, but he was mildly compromised by just having to alter course so many times throughout the final 3/8 of a mile of the race. So just interesting notes on horses in behind Classic Causeway, but no debating Classic Causeway, the best horse on the day. And we'll see ultimately how he stacks up against some other horses pointing towards the Kentucky Derby, particularly, as you said, Craig, some other horses with a lot of early speed that he's going to have to contend with.
Yeah, and good point about Trademark. I actually was watching him closely because I used him underneath, and he gave me a pretty good run for my money, as I imagine you probably did as well. He fought to the wire, wasn't the greatest trip, and he actually wound up with a 106 speed figure, just as good as the second and third place finishers in here. So not sure what the future holds for him. Not sure how far he wants to go, but I thought for a 72 to 1 shot, he ran pretty well.
Well, Craig, Tampa Bay Downs did give you a good race to compare the Tampa Bay Derby to, and they ran the Challenger at the same distance for older horses, just 3 races earlier. And I thought this Grade 3 event played out pretty nicely for some up-and-comers, Scalding and Cody's Wish, 2 horses who were making their stakes debuts in this race, and they beat some seasoned older runners from last year, horses like Dynamic One and Greatest Honor, who had done well as 3-year-olds, both of those making their 4-year-old debuts in this race, but it was the slightly unfamiliar faces as Scalding and Cody's Wish who got the better of them, and I thought Scalding was pretty game in victory for Shug McGahee.
Yeah, I thought he ran a really nice race. He's a horse I definitely overlooked in here. Didn't think he was fast enough, to be honest. And he took a really nice step forward. Got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. A nice improvement over what he's been running. But that's not unusual for Shug McGahee horses. When you look at his pattern, he just keeps getting better. So as a young 4-year-old, he looks like a horse who could be dangerous in this handicap division. And the runner-up also ran very well. He actually, Cody's Wish, he got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure for his effort. I mean, they were only a neck apart at the wire. But yeah, I thought he progressed nicely too. He had run some nice races, had come in on a winning streak, had overcome some slow paces, particularly in his last race. So he's another dangerous one going forward that seems to be in really good form right now.
Yeah, both of these horses just kind of cycled through their allowance conditions. They both were coming into this race with win streaks. Scalding now comes out of it having won 3 in a row. Maiden N1X allowance, and now he's got the Grade 3 victory. Cody's Wish had run 3 in a row coming into this, and he just missed out on that graded stakes victory here. I thought they both ran pretty well, each of them with the best speed figures of their career in this race. Cody's Wish getting the slightly higher number, 120 to the 119 of Scalding, due to the fact that the early pace of this race was not that fast, Craig. And in the early going, I thought they were kind of handing the race to Wolfie's Dynaghost, who was allowed to open up 2 to 3 lengths on the field, not going that fast. But Wolfie's Dynaghost has never been the most reliable horse, and he just couldn't really see it out. He faded through the stretch with no real excuse. And Craig, did you see any excuse for some of the horses with name recognition coming in, like Dynamic One or Greatest Honor? Because both of them were a little disappointing here.
Yeah, I would say so. The real disappointment for me was Dynamic One, who actually somehow found himself way towards the back of the pack. I think we both, if we had to guess before the race, would have said Greatest Honor and him would have been in the opposite positions. So I didn't see a whole lot other than it was their first race back from a layoff, so maybe they'll improve second out. This probably wasn't the goal for either one, so I'm not going to write them off just yet. The interesting thing for me is we're talking about the pace, and it wasn't very strong at all, but it was very similar to the Tampa Bay Derby, and I think it's worth going back and just looking at the raw times. I'm not a big raw time guy, but the way this race finished compared to the way the Classic Causeway race finished is a pretty stark difference. And it's not like these are the top handicap horses in the country. They just finished this race off a lot faster than what Classic Causeway was able to do.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Greatest Honor, who, Craig, as you know, I was not a big fan of coming into this race, is he really found himself in the wrong spot leaving the backstretch. I thought Jose Ortiz did the right thing early in the race, trying to get some forward position in a race that didn't appear to have much pace, but he found himself in behind that tiring runner tune in heading into the far turn, and he just kind of got shuffled back between horses. I don't know if he really had another option at that point in the race once he found himself in behind that horse, but he just kind of, through no fault of his own, got put in last place at the quarter pole when he probably had more run than that at that point. And look, nobody was really changing position through the stretch of this race, as you said. They came home pretty fast in the end. So I just feel like Greatest Honor didn't get the best run into the race. Not saying he was ever going to win this race. I don't really view him as a major player in the handicap division this year. And you're probably not going to get that big of a price on him next time because he does have quite a following. But just I wanted to give him a slight excuse.
Yeah, and I mean, the funny thing to notice is he got a 113 speed figure from us. His career best had been a 115. Obviously, that came way back over a year ago at Gulfstream Park. But, you know, maybe there is some room to go up. But I'm with you. I've never been his biggest fan. I don't like that. He's more of a grinder, doesn't really have that big turn of foot. So I guess we'll see with him. But as you say, he's always going to be a short price. So he's generally the kind of horse I'm going to try to beat almost every time he runs.
Craig, I would say arguably the most impressive performance that we saw at Tampa Bay on Saturday was turned in by Bleecker Street in the Grade 2 Hillsborough. And this mare, or filly, I should say, she's 4 years old, is kind of amazing because you'd have to imagine that Chad Brown and the Connections had pretty low expectations for her at the start of her career, beginning at Monmouth and even running her at the Meadowlands in her second start. But she just has kept improving with each race. Undefeated now in 5 starts, and this was, I would say, certainly her best effort to date.
Yeah, no doubt about it. She got a 118 speed figure from us, and if you actually look at the running line, it was one of those pace adjusted where the pace was really fast. It stuck out from all the other turf races on the card, and we knocked it down. It was a 127 final time figure. So she got a nice setup, but I mean, when you win by 4 lengths on the turf, I don't think it was the setup that did the trick. She was just the best horse in here for sure. That 118 is a career best. She keeps progressing forward every single time out. So I think she's even surprising her trainer, Chad Brown, when you read some of the comments. He's not thought she's the best horse in his barn, and he continued to believe that, but he had some real positive things to say, as you would expect after this effort. His other runner was able to run second in here, Rocky Sky, who was able to rebound from that not very good start in her North American debut, but she looked like she has some promise as well.
I do want to give some props to the morning line maker in Tampa, who we kind of doubted on the show last week, but nailed this one as Bleecker Street went off at 2-1 and Rocky Sky 9-2. I didn't think there'd be that big of a price difference, but there was, despite the fact that Irad Ortiz was named on Rocky Sky. Rocky Sky was in attendance to that pace that, as you mentioned, was very fast. I thought that she ran pretty well to be second here. Obviously, no match for that late kick produced by Bleecker Street, though Bleecker Street got that pace to run into. I would imagine that Rocky Sky might ultimately want to go a little bit farther based on some of her European form. You would think that maybe showing speed in a longer race when she's able to get to the lead, going a little bit slower on the front end, could be to her benefit. Bleecker Street, though, I mean, Craig, Chad Brown just has an embarrassment of riches right now among the older fillies and mares on the turf. I mean, he could have maybe 5 starters in the Jenny Wiley at Keeneland, I think the next major Grade 1 in this division. That's a race I think he's swept the trifecta of in the past, but Bleecker Street seems like she's earned a shot in a Grade 1 race like that.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, what the best story about this is the rider, Hector Diaz. He's not a guy that we normally see riding for Chad Brown, but he's stuck with him even as she's moved up the class ladder. And for me, that's just a really good story. And hats off to Chad Brown, because I'm sure every time this horse is entered, his phone's ringing off the hook from some of the agents of the more bigger known top riders in the game. But this guy rides the horse absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I agree with that. I saw his post-race interview and he gave some very candid responses. It's nice to see that from a rider. Sometimes you interview a jockey post-race and it's like they're reading from a script, but it was nice to hear Hector Diaz really be honest about this ride and how he just tries to ride every horse like it's like it's a claiming race basically, and give his best effort every time, and that's how he approached this one. So nice to see a jockey like that get success from a barn like Chad Brown. Moving on to the Florida Oaks, Grade 3 event for the 3-year-old fillies. And Craig, similar situation where Chad Brown swept the exacta. He's having quite a start to 2022 so far. I think I tweeted some stats for him earlier in the week about his ROI among all starters this year. I mean, it's a kind of a terrifying set of statistics for the top trainer in the country. But he did well in this race with Dolce Zell and Spicer, the runner-up. Those two dueled to the finish. I thought they both got great trips.
Yeah, they did. It wasn't a lot of pace on. They were both close up. Obviously, Spicer was mostly on the lead. Dolce Zell sitting just off the lead, and she was able to run her down. And I mean, I thought it was a good effort by her. She's going to get a 104 TimeformUS speed figure. She gets obviously a bigger pace upgrade into this slow pace than Spicer would, because Spicer was up front while Dolce Zell was further back in the field. And I thought it was a good effort in her debut. A 104 is really solid for this time of year for 3-year-olds. So not sure what the future holds for these. And yeah, I just echo what you said about Chad Brown. I retweeted that tweet that you put out. It's not so much the winning percentage. We almost expect that. But for a guy with the name recognition of Chad Brown to have such a highly positive ROI is pretty much unheard of over that big of a sample. I can't remember ever seeing anything like that. So he's obviously got everything firing right now.
Yeah, I thought given the slow pace of this race, just both Ortiz brothers had their mounts in the right spot. Spicer up close to the pace, and Dolce Zell just kind of tracking right in behind. Irad really gave her the perfect ride, tipping out once they got into the stretch, doing so seamlessly, and she was able to get up on the wire. Just wanted to mention also ran On Alert, who got up for third in this race. She's maybe the one that I would want to follow moving forward, because as we were saying, there's really no pace in this race. 3 of the fractions color-coded in blue, and On Alert closed from last place. I thought she got a great ride in doing so, saving ground under Javier Castellano, but just a horse that's been stepping forward with each race and seems like one that might want to go a little farther down the line, trained by Shug McGahee, so I think further improvement can be expected, but she's the one that finished in behind that I would want to follow moving forward.
Yeah, and you can see that in our speed figures where she got a 102 compared to Spicer's 99 because of how fast she finished off the race.
Yeah, there was another stakes for the 3-year-olds. In the next race, the Columbia didn't get a particularly fast speed figure. Just do you want to mention Craig made a good call on the runner-up, Ben's Malice, who was second at 13-1, but the Colts ran significantly slower, I should say, than the fillies. So I didn't see too much that I wanted to mention out of that race, Craig.
No, it wasn't on the rundown, and I obviously had no problem with that. It wasn't the strongest race by any stretch. So yeah, I think you made a good call there.
Yeah, the one other race for the 3-year-olds that we should mention from Saturday was a maiden race that took place earlier in the day, going 1 mile and 40 yards on the dirt. And Craig, it's not often that you see 1 to 20 shots go down to defeat, but that's what happened here with Command Performance, who just didn't look like the same horse that we saw as a two-year-old. It appeared that a maiden victory was going to be a foregone conclusion for this guy after he was second in the Champagne last year. Didn't even run that badly to be fourth in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but sometimes these two-year-olds just don't go on, and he didn't put forth his top effort for sure in this race.
No, he didn't. And, it made me question a little bit that figure from the Champagne where he ran a really nice race. But when you look back through the chart, all the runbacks have been fine. My Prankster's going on to be a really good horse. Kavad, who was last that day, has backed it up. So, as you say, sometimes the two-year-olds just continue on. I just don't continue on. I assume maybe he's had some issues, but he just wasn't very good on this day. And the horse who was good was Fenwick. He looked really good. I'm not sure where this race came from. He hadn't run anything remotely close to this before, but he was able to explode and just draw away in the end. It wasn't particularly close. First time in the barn for a trainer I'm not familiar with, David Fisher. But he looked good. He's going to get a 106 TimeformUS speed figure. I should mention this a race, if you watch the replay, the time that comes up is definitely not the right time. It's since been adjusted to match the beam time for the day. We're not sure what really happened there to throw it off, but this race looked incredibly fast at first glance, and it turned out that wasn't the case. But still, a 106, it's solid, and I mean, he's not that far. He was 4 points off of what we saw from Classic Causeway, so don't know what the future holds for him, but he certainly looked like a different horse with blinkers and in a new barn.
Yeah, for sure. Those are the changes that I saw as well. It was not a private purchase. The same owner just transferred the horse from Steve Asmussen to this trainer, David Fisher, who I agree I'm not familiar with, but the horse had a lot more speed with the blinkers and just seemed to kind of wake up in this race because he had never shown this kind of ability before. So nice performance from him, but yeah, definitely a disappointing effort from Command Performance. Before we move away from Tampa, Craig, we should just mention one more race from earlier in the week. On Wednesday, the second race of the day was an allowance race going a mile on the turf, and the import Chez Pierre, going out for Lyle Stables and Arnaud Delacour, kept his undefeated record intact. This is a horse that had gone 3 for 3 sprinting in France to begin his career and stretched out in his U.S. debut and looked pretty good.
Yeah, he did look good. He got a 119 speed figure. The pace was pretty moderate in here. He was sitting second off of Drama Chorus, but these were some pretty decent allowance horses in here. It's not like he beat some slow pokes, and I thought it was a good effort and look forward to seeing where he shows up next because that 119 would certainly fit in most stakes races that we see.
Yeah, he did have to work pretty hard to run down that longtime leader who definitely had the pace in his favor, not going particularly quick on the front end. But this horse kept to his task and wore that one down when they got to the finish. I would say the race got a little bit easier when his main rival and stablemate Talk or Listen just didn't show up with any kind of effort. I think he was eased through the stretch, so maybe not as strong a race as it seemed on paper. But this horse definitely made an auspicious start to his U.S. campaign and could try Stakes Company next time. Let's move on to Oaklawn Park, where we saw some of the best horses in action this past week in the Grade 2 Azeri Stakes, the local prep for the Grade 1 Apple Blossom. And I would imagine we'll see some of these horses that completed the trifecta in the Azeri back in the starting gate for the Apple Blossom. And Craig, nice to see CC get another graded stakes victory. This is a mare who wasn't always the most consistent sort early in her career, but seems like she's really gained consistency with age. And she's just put forth good effort after good effort recently, coming off being crowned the champion sprinter from last year among the females and was able to win going the mile in the 16th here.
Yeah, I was glad to see her get back to routing because I'm one who didn't think she was, should be pigeonholed as just a sprinter. I mean, she's a horse who I believe won the Apple Blossom a couple years ago. And even in defeat, she was running some pretty fast races in California when she was going 2 turns. So she's obviously very versatile. The one disappointment for me, because watching this race visually, I mean, it looked like they were just throwing it down. It was a fun race to watch, and any of 3 horses looked like they could win with a furlong to go. And I assumed it was going to get a big speed figure, but it did not. It only got a 110 for the winner. And I have to say, it was very tempting to break this race out because it really didn't make a lot of sense when you look at the chart. nearly all of the top horses regressed in here. So it's one I did give that notation an N, where it's basically saying I could have broke it out, but I didn't. But it was just a really tough call. There was a race at the exact same distance in the next one, and this was really the only race that didn't fit. So it won't surprise me if these horses come back and run faster next time. But it was just one of those I couldn't pull the trigger on arbitrarily upgrading it when all the other races seemed to fit perfectly.
Yeah, what I will say about that is I'm not so surprised that the second and third place finishers regressed a little bit because, I mean, Pauline's Pearl just got clobbered at the start of this race. I mean, she broke about a half step slowly and the field just came over on her, as they often do when a horse breaks slowly, and she just got totally squeezed out of position at the start of the race. So, I mean, she had some adversity to overcome. And She Dares the Devil, Craig, I don't know about you, but halfway through this race, I was asking myself how much is she going to win by, because they allowed her to get away on pretty soft fractions. She looked like she was doing it so comfortably, and she just didn't finish off this race. So I was pretty disappointed in her. So for those two, I'm not that surprised that the speed figure regressed a little bit. And as for Cece, what do you make of what happened in mid-stretch of this race? Because it looked like she was going to go on and win by 3 lengths, and she kind of pulled herself up a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm usually not one to buy all those could have run faster, but it sure looked like she pulled herself up when she made the lead. And then she showed as she was pulling back away at the end when she got under some urging that maybe she did. I don't know why. I'm not going to try to get into the horse's mind of what she was thinking, but I do think it was clearly a case of she thought that her job was done and stopped running, and Victor Espinoza had to get back into her, and she was able to get it done. So not sure what to make of that. I don't think it's something we've really seen from her before that I remember. She seems to be the kind that always runs through the wire. So yeah. It was a good talking point. Don't know how to explain it. Totally agree. As for She Dares the Devil, even the track announcer Vic Stouffer sounded like he was almost conceding the race to She Dares the Devil down the backstretch, and I don't blame him, because I was thinking the same exact thing as the fractions came up, and she just came up totally empty. So solid race from the top two. Disappointing from her, but she's kind of one that's been up and down before. She runs some big races, runs some not so good races. So I'd be willing to give her another shot when she comes back. But she's always going to be a short price. So I'd say I'd give her another shot. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if she ran better, but she's not the kind that I would be looking to bet back.
Yeah, I tweeted after the race, maybe Cece forgot there are 2 finish lines at Oaklawn, because it looked like she pulled herself up right after getting by to the first one. But upon rewatching the replay of this race, I think what actually happened is there's a big shadow at Oaklawn Park from about the 16th pole to the wire, whereas they're kind of running in the sunlight for upper stretch. And it looked like just as she was approaching that shadow, that's when she put her ears up, like she was almost tentative running into that portion of the track. And she definitely slowed down quite a bit. But I mean, once she felt those horses coming on to her inside and outside, she re-engaged and put her ears back and kept on running. So it does feel like, even though the margin was 3/4 of a length, if she had run through the wire from the point where she made her move to the finish, maybe she would have won this race by 2.5, 3 lengths, and the speed figure would be a little bit higher. Still somewhat disappointing compared to her prior efforts, but like you said, it's hard to know what to make of this race. It just came back aberrationally slow, so we'll see how these horses do next time, if they all do come back in the Apple Blossom. Let's move on to a couple of other races from this past weekend at Oaklawn Park, both allowance events for the 3-year-olds. Earlier in the day, when they ran the Azeri on Saturday, Craig, we saw We the People in action, going off as a heavy favorite in an N1X allowance race after winning his debut for trainer Rodolphe Brissett earlier in the Oaklawn Park meet, and wasn't facing the toughest field here in the 4th race on Saturday, but certainly did what he was supposed to do, winning pretty easily.
Yeah, he looked really good, just like he did in his debut. He handled I think he went a 16th of a mile further than he did first time out, and he looked good. He's going to get a 105 speed figure, 109 final time. And for me, these, I've mentioned before, these are the toughest kind of horses to judge, because he really didn't have to do any running whatsoever early. He tracked a very moderate pace with the pace figures in the mid 80s. All the fractions are coded in blue, so he finished off the race just fine, as you would expect for a good horse. I think they're pointing Arkansas Derby next time. As we've seen, the group in Arkansas hasn't been the strongest. I know Secret Oath is now being pointed there, so seems like a logical spot. And honestly, I'm not sure how to think. I'm going to have to wait to see who else shows up and how he matches up, because these are definitely the tricky kind of horses for us bettors.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot to choose for him. Obviously, they do have to run him in a race like that if they have aspirations to make the Kentucky Derby. It's just asking a lot of this horse. I mean, he had debuted 4 weeks prior to this allowance win, and now they're going to run him back in 3 weeks in the Arkansas Derby. So that's 3 races in 7 weeks. That's a lot to ask for a horse that's going to be trying Grade 1 company in his 3rd career start. And he's going to have to run a little faster at the 105 and 103 TimeformUS speed figures that he's gotten in his first couple of starts. They're a little bit slower than the Philly Secret Oath, as well as some others that we're going to see in the Arkansas Derby. But obviously, he's the kind of horse that some might argue had a lot left in the tank both times, winning these races pretty easily without a lot of encouragement from Laurent Giroux. So he'll be an interesting horse to assess. Horses like this, though, they often do take a lot of money when they step up in class. So I would let price be my guide with him in the Arkansas Derby.
Oh, for sure. He's definitely the kind of horse I'm almost always going to play against. And as you say, if I am going to bet a horse like this as they move up in company, I want them to have the speed figures to back it up. We don't see it with him. Every now and then you'll get a horse who can come through and deliver. But the odds are stacked against him, as you say. And 3 races in 7 weeks will be quite a bit.
Now, Craig, it didn't get quite as much attention, but I was arguably more impressed by the filly that we saw on Sunday in an M1X allowance race going the same distance, 1 mile and a 16th, for Brad Cox, Interstate Daydream, who was coming back off a very long layoff and beat her favorite Brad Cox-trained stablemate, Warriors Battle, by 8 lengths, and the two of them were a dozen lengths clear of the rest of the field, and this winner looked pretty good.
Yeah, she looked very good. I wasn't as high on Warriors Battle. I mean, she had won her last 2 races easy, but didn't have very good speed figures. As a matter of fact, Interstate Daydream had a better speed figure as an August 2-year-old at Saratoga. So I thought the public had this one wrong, and it certainly looked that way on the racetrack, as she was able to just... she looked really good. I mean, she ran by her stablemate like she was standing still, just kept going. Again, it was a race without a lot of pace, but when you do get this kind of race, this is how I want to see one finish. She got a 106 TimeformUS speed figure, which is really good for the 3-year-old fillies. It's not too far off Secret Oath, if I remember correctly, and she is definitely the one. Obviously, she won by 8 lengths, but of these 2 Cox fillies, it's not even close. She was really good.
Yeah, she just inhaled her stablemate in upper stretch and soared clear without a ton of encouragement from Giroux at all. A horse that, as you said, she had shown ability as a 2-year-old running second in that Adirondack. Seemed like she really did improve with the added ground, making her 3-year-old debut here. So she's pretty lightly raced. I haven't seen the plans yet for her in terms of reporting. Obviously, she'd be coming back in just 20 days if they tried the fantasy, but maybe it's worth doing so with Secret Oath not running in that race. It seems like it kind of opens up the fantasy to some other horses, and she's certainly got the speed figures to be competitive with those that were finishing behind Secret Oath in a race like the Honeybee. So she'd be pretty formidable if she showed up in that graded stakes next time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Secret Oath was basically toying with the rivals there, and like I said, she ran pretty close to a similar speed figure. So, and unlike We the People, this would just be her second start as she was coming off that long layoff.
And there were a couple of Grade 3 events out in California last week. At Santa Anita on Saturday, the feature was the Grade 3 San Luis Rey going 1.5 miles. And Craig, the likable 8-year-old Acclimate, collects another graded stakes victory here, doing it the way that he does it on the front end.
Yeah, he's such a cool horse. I have the official speed figure for him. I didn't have it when we were doing the rundown. He wound up with a 119. I wish I had made note of the pace figures. I'll try to look them up when as you give your take on this, he didn't have a lot of competition in here. I mean, he was even money. He pretty much looked like he stood out on paper speed figure wise, but you still got to do it on the racetrack. And this is a horse who just likes to run fast, and he was able to do it here. So cool horse. I mean, I don't think he's one we're going to be talking about it as any kind of turf champion or anything, but he took advantage of what's in Southern California right now, and that isn't a whole lot. So decent effort by him.
Yeah, the race got a little bit easier when his stablemate, who was likely to be favored, Say the Word, scratched. I think he had a minor issue this past week, so he did not participate. And not that Say the Word was a speed horse; he comes from way back in the pack. But Acclimate was just able to get loose on the front end here, and when you give him that early advantage, he's always tough to run down. He's a horse that really does like to fight to the wire, and Dicey Mochara loomed up to the outside, but you could just see Acclimate simply wanted it more than that horse, as Dicey Mochara had the momentum built up, but he just kind of flattened out in the late stages, and Acclimate fought on once he felt that horse to his outside. So we're never going to see a horse like Acclimate beating the best in the world, or probably even the best on the East Coast, but he's been the boss of this division in California for quite some time, always competitive in these races, and just nice to see him get back to the winner's circle.
Yeah, and I looked it up while you were talking. He was able to run a very even pace throughout, something he doesn't often have the luxury of. And the one thing with him is, when you're in a race with him that it's going to be some pace, because he's going to the front, and if you try to outrun him, he's just going to keep going faster and faster until the pace gets pretty insane, which we've seen in his PPs with tons of red fractions. And he didn't have to do that here, which is why he was able to win pretty easily.
The Sunday feature at Santa Anita was the Grade 3 Los Flores for the filly and mare sprinters. Craig, not a whole lot to say about this one. Obviously, the big favorite was Edgeway, who had been second to Cece in that Breeders' Cup filly and mare sprint last year, and she's come back now for her 5-year-old season, looking pretty good. Got the victory here, but this was just essentially a match race with Private Mission, and she was simply better than that foe.
Yeah, she was just a whole lot better. It was a weird case where they ran back-to-back graded stakes in California just over 2 different days. Can't remember ever seeing that before, other than maybe a Breeders' Cup day or something. But solid effort by Edgeway. She gets a 112 TimeformUS speed figure, did it easily. Her best figures, she generally runs right around the 115 mark. So I think pretty much at this point we know what she is. The real disappointment had to be Private Mission, who is just kind of falling off the map. Even though she ran second here, she was pretty much blitzed, and the fact she was able to hold second just shows there wasn't a whole lot in this 4-horse field.
Yeah, Private Mission was that horse that got that bizarre ride in the La Brea, where it seemed like Flavia and Pratt just took her to the back of the pack when she, on paper, as the 3-5 favorite, looked like the main speed of that race. Kind of wondered where her speed had went. Well, it was back here, but her staying power was still missing, as she was just no match for Edgeway at the end of this race. So seems like maybe she's just gone the wrong way. We will stick with the filly and mare sprinters, though, and head over to Gulfstream Park on the East Coast, as same division was in action on Saturday at Gulfstream in the Grade 3 Hurricane Birdie. And Craig, this was a race that didn't appear to have that much pace on paper, and I think that's part of the reason why the bettors sent Obligatory off as the second choice in the wagering. Kind of looked like she'd be a heavy favorite on paper, given her accomplishments from last year, but I guess they were a little bit concerned about the pace. Ultimately, that was not a big deal, because her main rival, Four Graces, just didn't have any speed either, and Obligatory is simply better than this field.
Yeah, she ran. I watched this race while it was happening, and I thought she looked really good visually, and the speed figure was pretty good too. She got a 114. It was a race that got pretty quick early for some reason. The first 2 furlongs were really fast before it kind of toned down and was just even the rest of the way, and she never really looked like a loser if you were watching the race. She was kind of lagging at the back, but you could tell she had a lot of horse. And once she started to make her move, the race was basically over. Yeah,
she's one of these horses that's just really blossomed over one turn, but she needs pace. As you said, she got a little more than she appeared to or seemed likely to on paper, but they got a little aggressive with the front runner in the early going, and that helped set up her late run. But I also thought Tyler Gaffleone gave her a good ride, because he didn't just languish at the back of the pack, he made that early move into contention around the far turn. So she was right there to pick up the leader when that one started to come back to the pack. And she just seems like she's in good form right now. There obviously are some pretty lucrative prizes out there for the fillies and mares going one turn this year, but for her, it's just all dependent on how much pace is signed on in those races. One more race to mention from Gulfstream Park before we move away from Florida is a maiden race that took place earlier in the day. Or actually, I should say later in the day on that Saturday card, because the Hurricane Birdie went as race 7 and this maiden race for the 3-year-olds went as race 9. And Craig, this looked like it had the potential to be a nice race coming in, because we had a couple of horses that finished behind that very impressive debut winner, Nitrous Channel, coming back for their second starts. The one that the bettors went to, Stay Restless, was a little disappointing, but it was actually the third place finisher from that Nitrous Channel race who got the job done here, Uniki, and he looked pretty good in victory coming from off the pace this time.
Yeah, he did, and he's going to get a 107 speed figure for the effort. I will say it was a not an easy day for speed figure making. This is one my assistant did, and when I sent you the rundown, I said, I usually can get within a point or so. And for this one, I said this could be anywhere between a 102 and a 112, because it was one of those situations where the rains came in between some of the races. It was fast. This one was sloppy. Then the track was drying out. So it was a tough one. I haven't had a chance to discuss it with my assistant yet, but I have no problem with the number he gave, a 107. It fits, and pretty strong race for 3-year-old maidens in just early March.
Yeah, I'm not sure how far the winner's going to want to go, but I thought he did run well in this race, showing that new dimension to come from a little bit off it. He got somewhat rank in the early going, not to a concerning degree, but he was tugging a bit at the rider, but eventually settled. I thought he showed a nice turn of foot when the seas parted for him at the top of the stretch and he was able to come through. I thought some first-time starters also put in nice efforts in behind. This is a race that I might do for my horses to watch video a little bit later in this week, because I thought there were some that finished off the board that made nice mid-race moves that maybe are worth highlighting. And you do want to pay attention to horses that come out of fast maiden races like this, because sometimes there is some quality in behind and they can do better in their subsequent starts.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how Nitrous Channel comes back, because this kind of backs up that big speed figure that he ran first time out back in February.
Yeah, for sure. He looks like a promising one for the George Weaver barn. Let's move on to some stakes races at some venues that we don't always touch upon. One of those is Turfway Park, where their feature on Saturday was the Big Daddy Stakes, going 6 furlongs on the Tapeta surface. And that Turfway stalwart visitant, Craig, got his 5th victory in a row at Turfway. Not all consecutive, because he's run a dirt a few times in between there. But this horse just loves the Tapeta surface at Turfway and got another stakes victory here.
Yeah, if all the races were run on Tapeta, this guy would probably win an Eclipse Award because they can't touch him at Turfway Park. He went off 1-5 and just did what he does. He's able to win from a variety of ways. He usually shows some speed, but he's come from behind in the past as well. And just a really, really cool horse, as you say. He got a 1:15 TimeformUS speed figure. The final time was a 1:19. His last couple races have been bumped down because it seems like nobody wants to challenge him very much. He's able to get up there, go pretty slow. The pace doesn't get hot, but I think he's probably a horse that I would rate more off of the final time numbers than I do his adjusted number.
I mean, not only does he love the synthetic, but I mean, he's a pretty versatile horse with regard to distance. I think he won the Kentucky Cup Classic going 2 turns last year. And in this race, he went 6 furlongs and nearly set a track record. So it's nice to have those options that a horse can sprint or go the 2 turns. And he seems to run comparable speed figures regardless of the distance. So he's not a horse that needs the lead. He can come from off the pace. He can set the pace. He's just a likable horse, and he's clearly in great form right now. So as you said, Craig, they don't run the Breeders' Cup on synthetic anymore, and there aren't that many graded stakes races out there for these synthetic lovers, but he definitely is tough to beat when those races do come up.
Yeah, and it's not like he's terrible in dirt. He was able to run second in the Ali Sheba, grade 2 at Churchill, behind Max Field. He was beaten pretty easily that day, but it's not like he's hopeless when he shifts over to that surface.
Now, Craig, one of the fastest speed figures that you handed out this week was at a Thursday allowance race at Turfway Park to Mr. Dumas, a horse that we know has competed in stakes on turf for the past couple seasons, but he's being run over the Tapeta track at Turfway Park this winter, and he's done okay, but has run into some tough spots in stakes companies last couple races. Dropped in class to an allowance race here and was just much the best.
Yeah, he put it all together here, got a 121 speed figure. This one got a pace upgrade because he was able to overcome a pretty slow pace. He was about 3 lengths back early. And what I like from him is he was able to make the lead by the time they hit the near the top of the stretch. He was already had made his move. The front runners in this race weren't a whole lot, even though one of them was a Wesley Ward horse next, but he was kind of packing it in at the time, so not really sure what to make of this race, and you never really know what's in the future for these horses because, as you said, there's not a whole lot at Turfway as far as graded stakes races. I imagine they have some on the Jeff Ruby stakes card coming up, and maybe we'll see a clash between him and Visitant.
Yeah, that would be nice because both of these horses can go the mile distance or a little bit farther. Yeah, Craig, I never know what to make of these synthetic races that feature the slower paces and get an upgrade. It makes sense to me on the turf. I feel like sometimes we see these synthetic races that feature slow paces and they still fall apart. And this is one of those where the race flow would lead you to believe that it was a closer-dominated race, but the pace kind of says otherwise. So I don't really know what to make of horses like Mr. Dumas and King Cause, who really got big speed figure upgrades here coming from off the pace. We just don't see enough synthetic racing for me to really be sure of how to handle these horses.
Yeah, I agree. We don't give as much credit as we do on turf, but it's tough because, as you say, the synthetics can play funny. I mean, I've watched a lot of races at Gulfstream this winter, and it seems like the front runners have everything their own way, and they're just going to draw away, and then they finish 8th and 9th as the wide sweepers come up and get them, and other days are able to go on. So I guess I don't play a lot of synthetic tracks. It seems like it's something that you would have to stay in tune with and kind of keep note of how tracks play day to day. Here soon we'll be getting Woodbine, which is one of the tracks I do play and follow pretty closely. So looking forward to that. Just a side note, because that is the one other big track where we see top races on the synthetic surface.
Well, Craig, before we finish up the podcast, I didn't want to go without mentioning a stakes race that we saw all the way back on Monday of last week at Parks, the Fishtown Stakes, which was won by a local park sensation, Hollywood Jet, who has now won his 5th race in a row. This horse was claimed for just $12,500 about a year ago by his current connections, and he's really turned into a good one.
Yeah, he's a fast one that just keeps running better speed figures every time out. He's moved from in his wins. In his win streak, he started with a 106 and has progressed all the way up to a 119, which he got here, and he beat some pretty decent horses in here. I mean, when you look through the chart of the horses coming in, the horse he beat last time had run a 113. The horse back in third had run a 116. So I don't think it's anything fluky here. And he's got that quick turn of foot out of the gate, and he's pretty game in the lane. So he was able to hold off Sir Alfred James, a horse we've talked about before. He's a horse who ran some big synthetic races, if memory serves, but he's run some good ones on the dirt too. So not sure what the future holds for Hollywood Jet, but that's a pretty good speed figure.
Yeah, this horse just knows one way to go. That's to show a lot of early speed and try to hold on late. I feel like the runner-up in this race, Sir Alfred James, is just omnipresent in any sprint stakes race anywhere in the country. It seems like he's running every week in them, and he sometimes runs pretty well. I thought he did so here, but he got some honest fractions to close into up front. Hollywood Jet, though, he fought off all challengers to get this victory, like you said, with a pretty strong 119 TimeformUS speed figure. I know a lot of people sometimes question whether that Parks form can translate to other circuits. Often we don't see that happen, but it's not like this horse's owner, trainer, Carlos Milian, who I admit I'm not familiar with. It's not like he's one of these Parks miracle workers. I mean, he only won 8 races last year with just like a 7% win rate, and he's got some victories recently, but it's mostly due to this one horse. So it just seems like a low-profile barn that happened to make a really good claim, and this horse is certainly thriving right now.
Yeah, and as far as Sir Alfred James, who you mentioned, I had to go back and look because you're right. It seems like we talk about him all the time. Since November 6th, this was his actually ninth start, and we're only in March. So you got to love that kind of horse. He seems to thrive. He doesn't always show up with his best race, but he's obviously as sturdy as they come.
Yeah, I think he's just a fun horse to watch, and they ship him all over the country, and he keeps running pretty well. Even when it looks like he's going off form, he'll come back with a resurgence like he showed in this race. So just an interesting race to mention from Parks last week. Well, Craig, those are all the races we want to cover on the Pacecast this week. This Derby picture, it still seems like there are some chips that have to fall into place or some puzzle pieces that have to be put on the board because a lot of pace horses, a lot of speed signed on for the Derby right now. We'll see if all these runners stay healthy, but kind of still waiting for that horse to establish himself as the clear one to beat. I don't think Classic Causeway did it this week. I'm not sure anybody did it last week, but we still have a few preps to go, so we'll see what happens. No prep on the schedule, though, next week, Craig, so we'll have to see what we want to handicap for the TimeformUS forecast. I know they've got a couple of graded stakes at Oaklawn, so maybe we'll take a look at that card.
Yeah, I haven't looked ahead. I did know we're getting a break from the 3-year-old preps and kind of much needed. Sometimes we get off track a bit with that. It's still a little bit early in the game. The 100-point races are coming up soon. I believe next is the fairgrounds races. So it's about to start getting hot and heavy. And for right now, I mean, I don't like to look too far ahead, but the pace scenario for a guy who's a pace figure guy like me is sure looking like something with horses like Early Voting and Forbidden Kingdom and Classic Causeway, and there's just I think I'm forgetting someone else. I know there's another fast one out there, but yeah, it's fun times. But I also look forward to focusing on some other races this week. It's the 3-year-old stuff. Sometimes you can use a break because it seems like sometimes it's nonstop from the Breeders' Cup Juvenile through May.
Yeah, a lot of speed horses. I mean, I know a lot of people like Epicenter, Forbidden Kingdom. I mean, we'll see what kind of pace situation. Yep. Yeah, what kind of pace situation they have to deal with. I mean, even horses like Morello and Early Voting, if they eventually make the Derby, they could be speed horses as well. So it seems like a lot of horses with similar running styles marching towards the first Saturday in May right now. So, but as Craig said, still a lot to be sorted out with that final round of prep races. We'll get to all of that in a few weeks' time. But for now, remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast that Craig and I put out later in the week.